So today marks the 15th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. And over the last couple weeks, I've been talking to people, listening to their memories and their stories and recalling where I was. And I had this moment a couple weeks ago. I was walking my daughter to school and started to ask her what she remembered of it. And had that realization that she wasn't alive when it happened. And then I quickly had this second realization that for all of her life, our country's been at war. And sometimes it's been called a war, and sometimes not. Sometimes the fighting has been more intense, other times less intense. But I had this realization for all of the years that my daughter has been alive, she's lived in a country that's somewhere in the world there are U.S. men and women actively engaged in military conflict. And from there, I started to think back to Jesus and the world that he was born into. And I thought, he might in some way know what it was like to live today. And we might in some ways know what it was like to live in his time. Because for him, the major war had ended 60 years ago. That was when the Romans had come in and conquered Israel and taken it over. But in the 60 years since, and then through his lifetime, there were continued scattered outbursts of military violence, and then the Romans coming in to put it down with military violence, and sometimes more intense and sometimes less intense. But he, kind of like us, lived in a world and was born into a world that there was always, at least in the background, the possibility of violence and for it to be related to military. And so it just gave me a little bit of a context as I started looking at what Jesus taught. And one of the places that captures his teaching, kind of consolidates it all together, is in the book of Matthew. Matthew tells us that one day Jesus went to a hillside in Galilee, which was up in the north and kind of overlooking the Sea of Galilee, where he got a lot of his fishermen disciples. But he went up on the hillside and people gathered around them, and he began to talk about the kingdom of heaven. And some people said, oh, well, that Jesus, he's just talking about this escapist stuff, that it's off, in the far future, this far distant thing, and we've got problems right here and now. But those who really listened to him closely realized that he was talking about if you were part of the kingdom of heaven, yes, maybe it was something in the future when you died, a place you could go, but it was also here and now. And the easiest way I know to think about that is, I'm going to ask you, all of us, okay, we are all in Richardson at the moment, but are there anyone here, or is there anyone here that lives somewhere else? Like you're Garland, Plano, Dallas, maybe any others I'm missing? Those are the big ones. Okay, so all of you who raised your hands, you are all residents of somewhere else. But at the moment, you're right here in Richardson. Jesus was saying the same thing to these people as he was teaching. You, as followers of him, are all residents of the kingdom of heaven, wherever it is that you're living right here and now. And so he began to teach about what the kingdom of heaven is like and what the residents of the kingdom of heaven are like. And Matthew captured that teaching. And I want to read you some of it from chapter 5 in his book. It says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And so he goes through this long list of describing people who will be part of the kingdom of heaven and how they'll be blessed and all these particular ways in which they'll know that they're part of the kingdom of heaven and they'll know that they are blessed. And by and large, a lot of them don't sound very pleasant. The blessed, he says, will be people who are mourning and people who are persecuted. And it doesn't really seem all of that great. And at the end, he does say part of it is that once you die and go to heaven, there will be rewards if things are difficult here. But other people started to realize too, and in the years since have realized that sometimes it's tragedy and it's hardship and it's difficult times that draw us to God more quickly than we would anywhere else. I remember in the days after 2001, it's September 11th in 2001, there was a period, it wasn't that long, but about a week, where the nation turned out and came to seek God and come to church. And in the Hebrew tradition that Jesus came out of, to be blessed wasn't necessarily to feel good or to be joyful, but the primary meaning was to be close to God. And so when Jesus started talking about all these ways that people are blessed, he was saying sometimes things are good, sometimes things are difficult, but particularly when they're difficult, sometimes that draws us closer to God, and that's where truly the blessing can be found. I want to focus in on one of these blessings today, given that it is the anniversary of 9/11, and that is where he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Could anybody use some more peace in your life or in the world? Wouldn't it feel blessed just to have peace and a lack of conflict? Lots of times when I think of peace, the very first thing that I think about is just when there's not any more fighting, either at the international level or the political national level or even interpersonally. It would just be so peaceful if people just weren't fighting. And actually, that's what the Roman Empire offered in Jesus' time. A phrase came to describe it. They called it the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome in Latin, because what they did was they came in and they ruled with such an iron fist that nobody dare fight. And if they did, they knocked them down violently. And it was a sort of peaceful. There was a lack of conflict, but if Jesus had been talking about that kind of peace, he might have said, "Blessed are the conquered," because that's what Rome offered. But Jesus came out of a tradition that had a much deeper understanding of peace, and they had a word that they used, was the word shalom. It meant not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of wholeness. And so on a national or international level, it meant not just a lack of military fighting, but a presence of justice. And on an interpersonal level, it meant not just a cessation of fighting, but it actually meant people who had been fighting reconciling with each other. Jesus said that's the people who can kind of make that kind of peace. That's where blessing is. That's when people draw to God. And so my mind very quickly goes to, okay, I want that kind of world, I want those kind of relationships, I want that kind of community. How do I do it? And one of the ways that I see a pattern recurring in Jesus' life where he did that was he would take people that really didn't know anything about each other except stereotypes and often negative stereotypes, and he brought them together where they came to know each other as actual people. So there's a story in the Gospel of John where Jesus and his disciples have gone down to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is down in the southern part of Israel. And they're getting ready to go home. They're all from Galilee, which is up in the northern part of Israel, and it's time to pick what route they're going to take. There's one route that kind of goes out this way and goes along the Jordan River and gets you up there. There's another one that's more direct, but it goes straight up and it goes through this land in the middle of Samaria. And the people in Galilee and the people in Samaria, they did not normally interact with each other. And even as you read the Bible, you find that they had lots of stereotypes about each other, and primarily negative stereotypes. Jesus decides to go through Samaria. And while he's going through there, the opportunity arises to talk to a woman who lives there, and Jesus talks with her, and in talking with her, a further opportunity arises where they can even spend the night in the city where she lives. And the scripture says Jesus took his disciples and had them spend 2 whole days in this Samaritan city talking with the people. And I imagine, I don't know any other way that you could, where it could happen, that at the end of that, they now knew people and not just stereotypes. It's that kind of thinking that is behind, if you know anything about our church's partnerships with elementary schools. When we started at Mark Twain, from the very beginning, we wanted it to be not just something where we would go and then leave or go and drop off things and then leave, but we wanted it actually to be a partnership. We knew that at Mark Twain, there were particularly the students and the families, we might not normally get to know them, even though they're our neighbors, because of different languages, different economic realities. And so when we go to work at Mark Twain, we do our best to make sure it's always in the context of a partnership where we're working with parents and with students and with teachers, so that we're all doing something good for the school, but we're doing it together where we get to know each other. And suddenly these are actual people, our neighbors, and not just stereotypes, which may or may not have been negative, but we're building community. Today, in just a moment, well, in a few moments, we're going to have the opportunity to go and prepare meals for hungry children. We're going to do something good for these kids, some of whom we'll see because some of the meals will stay here in Richardson, some of whom we'll never see because they'll go overseas. But we'll do it with our neighbors. We'll have all these folks from Access, but all people from the community, some of whom will be strangers to us, and some of whom will be part of different churches, some of whom will be part of no churches, some of whom will be part of different religions altogether. This Feeding Children Everywhere event was organized by the Richardson Interfaith Alliance. And I want to share with you a little bit about how that got started and what they do and why they do it, because our church has been a key role in that. About 5 years ago, our church started putting together a strategic vision plan. We were trying to discern where God was leading us for the future and what we needed to do. And part of that was a group of people came here to the Civic Center, to City Hall, and talked to the mayor and council people and said, what does the city need that we as a church could help provide? And as I recall, the conversation started turning to emergency preparedness. There had been, Katrina a number of years ago, and all of a sudden the Dallas area needed to handle people who were fleeing from where there was a natural disaster. There was a recognition that there could be a natural disaster in Richardson, and that the whole community, there would be a need to mobilize and organize. And the city had kind of assumed that if that day came, they could go to a few key church leaders, and that the churches and the different religious faith communities had these networks, and they could just all organize, and in one quick sort of thing, organize a big chunk of the community. And that's not how it works, or it wasn't how it was. There was a pastor here who would be a friend with a pastor there, and maybe a Jew who would know a Roman Catholic, or a Muslim who would know a Buddhist or a Methodist, but there was no sort of formal organization, and it was just kind of spotty. And so the city invited representatives from all the different faith communities in Richardson to come here to the City Hall and the Civic Center and really just sit down and get to know each other and see if there might be a way that we could organize. And out of that came this organization called the Richardson Interfaith Alliance. And what they have been doing is what to me feels very much like peacemaking, or promoting wholeness and unity, that shalom kind of stuff, because they create events where people of different religions can come together and do something meaningful, but also get to know one another as more than just negative stereotypes. And so they've done a interfaith Thanksgiving service that they hosted a while back, and you might recognize the background of that picture. That was hosted at our church. And then the young people that are part of the Interfaith Alliance, they fielded a team to go to the Richardson Trash Bash this year, and they went throughout Richardson picking up trash. And then, of course, as I said, today they've organized this Feeding Children Everywhere. So each of the events, there's some way to have some sort of positive impact, but it's also about coming together and getting to know people, which, from what I see in Jesus, is at the basis of peacemaking. And so I read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount there, where he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And I think, I want to be blessed. And I think about me, and I think about you, and I think, I want people to look at us, and maybe even if they don't call us children of God, they see Jesus' life and actions and our life and actions, and they recognize there's at least some family resemblance. I want people to see that, and I want to be a peacemaker. I want peace in my interpersonal relationships, in our community, and in our world. And what I appreciate so much about the Richardson Faith Richardson Interfaith Alliance and our church's role in it. One of our pastors is actually the chair of the steering team now. Is they know it's hard for people to come together, particularly when all they have are stereotypes and maybe negative ones, because it's hard just to get to know strangers. It's even harder still when you know that there's something like religion that's pretty important, that somewhere there's some fundamental difference. They know it's hard to come together, but yet they go out and intentionally create events where we can come together, and they invite me to be a part of it. And so today I'm inviting you to be a part of it as we leave our worship service and go in to volunteer. And you don't have to serve with people you don't know, but I challenge you, if you're willing to go out of that bit of comfort zone, to go assemble meals with someone you don't know who may even be part of a different religion as we work together to bless these children and are involved in the larger work of peacemaking.